On April 14, 2014, 16-year-old Kevin Freeman entered a forest in Arizona and disappeared without a trace. 5 years have passed. And when the Los Angeles police found a dirty, disoriented homeless man during a raid on Skid Row in October 2019, no one suspected that he was the missing teenager. He didn't remember his own name and couldn't explain where he had been all these years. But you will find out in this video how a model student ended up in the hell of the streets hundreds of miles from home. Enjoy the video. Some names and details in this story have been changed for anonymity and confidentiality. Not all photographs are from the actual scene. On April 14, 2014, the morning in Oak Creek Canyon, Arizona, was deceptively calm. The sun had just begun to warm the massive red sandstone walls when Mark Freeman's silver SUV pulled up to a gravel lot at the start of the West Fork Trail. The area is considered one of the most scenic in the region, with towering cliffs covered in pine and juniper trees, creating a natural corridor that attracts thousands of hikers every year. On that Tuesday, however, the parking lot was almost empty. 16-year-old Kevin Freeman stepped out of the passenger seat, a tall, athletic boy dressed in a light khaki storm jacket and sturdy hiking boots. According to his father's testimony, which he later provided to detectives from the Coconino County Sheriff's Office, his son was in high spirits. Kevin was preparing his high school geology final project and intended to photograph specific layers of sedimentary rock that protrude to the surface deep in the canyon. Mark Freeman recalled that he offered to go along, but the boy insisted on hiking alone. He argued that he needed to concentrate on his work and hike about 6 miles at a brisk pace. At 8 o'clock in the morning, a CCTV camera installed at the entrance to the forest area captured the last confirmed image of Kevin. He adjusts the straps of his backpack, checks the pocket where the map was, and moves confidently deeper into the trail, disappearing into the shade of the trees. The first hours went according to plan. 11 o'clock 40 minutes was the last recorded moment of the teenager's digital existence. According to the billing data obtained by the police the next day, his phone briefly connected to a remote cell tower to send a text message to his girlfriend, Emily. The text was concise and, at first glance, optimistic. Found the perfect place. These were the last words Kevin sent to the outside world. Immediately after sending the text, the phone signal was cut off. Technical experts later noted in a report that the disconnection occurred instantly, without any prior battery drain or gradual loss of network, as if the device had been destroyed or forcibly turned off. As the sun began to set over the horizon and Kevin did not get in touch at the agreed time of 6 o'clock in the evening, his parents' anxiety quickly escalated to panic. Mark Freeman returned to the parking lot, hoping to see his son, but there was only silence. Emily, who received the last message, tried to call the boy throughout the night. The case file shows that she made 47 calls. Each of them went straight to voicemail, which only increased the sense of distress. Her testimony was one of the first pieces of evidence that the disappearance was not a planned escape or a joke. The search operation started at dawn on April 15th. The ranger team leader, having assessed the situation, decided to abandon the standard combing in squares. The local terrain, hard red sandstone and rocky scree, preserves traces extremely poorly, making conventional search methods ineffective. Therefore, a special group of professional trackers specializing in visual analysis of soil microchanges was involved in the operation. At the same time, drones equipped with high-resolution thermal imagers were launched and began to methodically scan the canyon, dividing it into sectors. The trackers' work yielded the first, but also the most eerie result. At a distance of 3.5 miles from the starting point, in the area where the official trail becomes barely visible, they found a chain of footprints. The tread prints matched Kevin's shoes perfectly. The tracks were deep, clear, and confident, indicating that the boy had been moving calmly, not running, and was not injured. The group followed his trail for several hundred feet to a wide, flat stone terrace that overhung a dry creek bed. This place fit the description of an ideal location for photographing geologic layers. But it was here that the logic broke down. In the middle of the stone slab, covered with a thin layer of sand and dust, the footprints simply disappeared. The last clear print of his left shoe looked as if Kevin had taken a step and vanished into thin air. The trackers carefully examined every inch of surface within a 100-foot radius. There were no slip marks to indicate a fall from the cliff. There were no knockdown rocks or broken shrub branches to indicate a struggle or escape. There were no traces of other people or large animals that could have crossed the boy's path. The ground around the last trail was untouched. The senior tracker's report describes this moment dryly, but with frightening precision. The subject stopped moving in the open area for no apparent physical reason. The thermal imagers worked continuously for 3 days. Drone operators peered at the monitors, looking for any thermal anomaly among the cold stones. However, the screens showed only emptiness or the occasional coyote. Kevin's parents, Linda and Mark, were actually living in a makeshift headquarters in the parking lot. Volunteers recalled that Linda would sit by the radio station for hours, listening to the search team's conversations, hoping to catch a word about the items they had found. But the airwaves only brought reports of checked and empty sectors. No one dared to tell them out loud what all the experienced rescuers understood. In such a landscape, with no water supplies, the chances of finding a person alive were melting away with every passing hour. Meanwhile, Emily and her friends were posting flyers with Kevin's photo in the nearby town of Sedona. She categorically refused to believe that he could have gotten lost. In an interview with a local TV channel, the girl said, "He knew this forest better than some of the rangers. He had been preparing for this hike for weeks, studying maps. He couldn't have just gone the wrong way." Her words sounded like a verdict on the search engine, which proved to be powerless. The Arizona forest continued to remain silent, giving up neither the boy nor his backpack, nor the slightest hint as to where the man might have gone in the middle of a clear day on an open stone terrace. The echo of his footsteps cut off, leaving only emptiness and endless unanswered questions. October 2019, Los Angeles, Skid Row. This is a place that the local police call a city within a city, where the laws of civilization dissolve among thousands of tents, cardboard boxes, and human despair. On the morning of October 15th, a joint team of Los Angeles police officers and social service workers conducted a routine sanitation raid under one of the concrete overpasses of the freeway. The goal was to check on the condition of the homeless, identify those in need of immediate hospitalization, and clear the area of accumulations of hazardous waste. The air, according to the raid participants, was thick with the smell of exhaust fumes, rot, and long, unwashed bodies. A patrol officer checking a sector near 5th Street noticed a lone figure sitting on a dirty mattress near a bridge support column. It was a young man, although it was almost impossible to determine his actual age due to the layers of dirt on his face and his tangled, long-cut hair hanging in dirty strands. He did not respond to commands to stand up, did not look up, and seemed oblivious to the chaos around him. When the officer came closer and touched his shoulder, the guy just flinched and tried to move deeper into the shadows, muttering incoherently. His behavior indicated deep disorientation and a critical physical condition. The officers noticed old, rough scars on the boy's hands, which he instinctively clutched to his chest. These were not just scratches or injection marks, but deep scars of uncertain origin that disfigured the skin on his palms and forearms. No documents were found on him. When asked standard questions about his name, he did not respond to standard questions about his name, date of birth, or place of residence. His gaze, according to the social worker's report, was glassy and directed through people, which is a characteristic sign of a prolonged stay in a state of altered consciousness or severe mental trauma. Due to the obvious signs of exhaustion and infectious skin lesions, it was decided to take him to the nearest emergency department of the district hospital. At the hospital, the guy was registered as a John Doe, a standard procedure for unknown patients. While the doctors were trying to stabilize his condition, treat his wounds, and take tests, a forensic scientist arrived in the ward to take his fingerprints. It was a routine action required to check the databases of wanted criminals or missing persons. The procedure took a few minutes. The scanner read the pattern of papillary lines, and the data was sent to the national system. The result came back in less than an hour and caused the detective on duty a real shock. The system produced a 100% match to a file created 5 years ago in another state. The fingerprints belonged to Kevin Freeman, a 16-year-old schoolboy who disappeared in Arizona in April 2014. The photo of a smiling teenager in a graduation suit appeared on the monitor screen in stark contrast to the exhausted, destroyed man. The detective checked the data several times, unable to believe his eyes. A boy thought dead in a desert canyon was found alive 500 miles from where he disappeared, in the heart of a homelessness epidemic. The LAPD immediately contacted their counterparts in Arizona, who in turn notified the Freeman family. Linda Freeman, Kevin's mother, took the next flight to California. According to the officer who accompanied her from the airport to the hospital, the woman was in a state of extreme nervousness. She had only one question in her mind: is it really him? The hope she had nurtured for 5 years was mixed with fear of what she was about to see. The moment of the meeting in the hospital room was one of the most difficult scenes in the story. When Linda entered the room, she stopped at the threshold. Witnesses, a nurse and a detective, recalled that the woman did not rush to her son with hugs or joyful cries. She slowly raised her hand to her mouth, covering her mute cry, and tears flowed from her eyes. In front of her sat a man who looked 10 years older than his biological age. Kevin was thin to the bone, his skin had a grayish tint, and his teeth were damaged. But the most frightening thing was the look in his eyes: empty, indifferent, devoid of any recognition. He looked at his mother as if she were part of a white hospital wall. A medical report prepared by a team of toxicologists and neurologists confirmed the worst fears. Kevin's body showed signs of prolonged and systematic exposure to aggressive illegal chemical mixtures. Doctors stated that these substances caused irreparable damage to his central nervous system. His cognitive functions were seriously impaired. He lost the ability to think coherently, had memory lapses, and could not recall the events of recent years. In fact, his personality was erased. The chemical exposure changed the structure of his brain, turning a former excellent student and a promising student into a person with the intelligence of a child and the reactions of a deeply traumatized creature. The detectives tried to conduct the first interview in the room, but it proved to be useless. Kevin could not answer how he got to Los Angeles, where he had been before, or who had done this to him. His speech was choppy, filled with words that made no sense. He mumbled about green walls and kept rubbing the scars on his arms as if they still hurt. It became obvious that the 5 years of silence had not been a voluntary escape. Someone or something was holding him, destroying his mind and body day after day. The same Kevin who entered the woods with a camera and dreams of a future was gone forever, leaving behind only this broken shell found under a bridge in Los Angeles. Now the investigation was tasked with finding out exactly what happened in that chasm of time between a sunny morning in Arizona and a dirty night on Skid Row. The creation of a joint investigative team between the Coconino County Sheriff's Department in Arizona and the Los Angeles Police Department was an unprecedented step for a case of this magnitude. On one side of the table sat the detectives who had combed the red rocks of Oak Creek Canyon in vain 5 years earlier. And on the other side sat the officers who found the boy in the concrete jungle of Skid Row. Their main task was to fill a half-decade-long gap in the timeline, but the key witness, Kevin himself, remained locked in his own mind. The interrogations in the hospital room were more like attempts to decipher delusions than standard police procedure. According to the protocols kept by the investigators, Kevin remained silent most of the time, staring at a single point on the wall. When he did speak, his words did not form logical sentences. He did not mention his parents, school, or the day he got out of the car in the parking lot. Instead, he repeated the same phrases, which the detectives carefully noted down, trying to find at least some geographical or situational anchor in them. "Green walls," he whispered when the nurses turned off the lights. And when asked about the people around him, he would shudder and talk about the man with the burn. This image caused him visible physical terror. Monitors recorded a sharp increase in his heart rate, and his breathing became shallow and rapid. The psychiatrists who worked with the man explained to the investigators that these fragmented memories were probably the imprints of the most intense traumatic experiences that the brain could not displace, even under the influence of heavy chemicals. However, no database contained information about a place with green walls or a perpetrator with characteristic burns that could be linked to the case. Realizing that it was impossible to get direct answers from Kevin, the detectives moved the investigation to the streets. The Skid Row neighborhood is a closed ecosystem with its own rules and hierarchy. Officers had to spend several weeks interviewing residents of tents and cardboard fortifications, showing them a photo of the boy they had found. Most turned away or claimed they had never seen him, not wanting to deal with the police. However, persistence paid off. One woman who had lived in the area for more than a decade recognized him. In her testimony, recorded on a dictaphone, the boy appeared under the name Ari. She explained that this nickname stuck to him because in the early days of his appearance, he kept mumbling a word similar to Arizona, but no one understood. According to the woman, Ari appeared on their street not 5 years ago, but much later. She confidently named the period, late autumn of 2017. This testimony was the first to tear the single line of time apart. If he appeared in Los Angeles only in 2017, it meant that he had spent the first 3 years after his disappearance elsewhere. Detectives began to check this information, narrowing their search to transportation hubs. Another witness, a man who often spent the night near the Greyhound bus station, confirmed the woman's words. He remembered the moment the boy appeared because he stood out from the crowd of ordinary passengers and local homeless people. According to his description, the young man got off a bus coming from the east and looked like he had just been pulled out of another world. The witness pointed out one detail that made Arizona investigators reconsider all their previous theories. The guy was not wearing street rags, but specialized high-quality tourist clothing. The jacket and pants were from an expensive segment designed for survival in the wild, but they were dirty, worn to holes, and most importantly, completely wrong for him. They were too big, hanging on his emaciated body like a bag, as if they had been taken off someone else and put on him in a hurry. The boy's condition at the time of his arrival at the station in 2017 was already critical. A witness described him as a walking dead man. Glassy eyes, impaired coordination of movements, complete lack of response to the appeals of passers-by. He did not look for food, did not ask for money, but simply sat down on the sidewalk and sat there for hours until one of the locals took him to a shelter. The signs of chemical dependency were already evident. This meant that the substances that destroyed his personality began to be introduced into his body long before he got to Los Angeles. This chronology dramatically changed the picture of the investigation. Previously, the investigation assumed that Kevin could have run away from home on his own, reached California, and gradually slipped to the social bottom. But the new facts painted a completely different scenario. Between April 14, 2014, when he disappeared into the canyon, and the fall of 2017, when he got off the bus in Los Angeles, there was a 3-year black hole. 3 years of which there was no digital trace, no witness, no record. He was not on the street during this time. His mismatched clothes suggested that he was held and changed. His state of deep chemical depression indicated that his will was broken systematically. Someone put him on that bus. Someone bought him a one-way ticket to get rid of him when he became unnecessary or too problematic. The investigation was no longer looking for the answer to the question of how he survived on the streets. Now detectives had to find out exactly where Kevin Freeman was physically located during the 3 years his parents combed the Arizona woods, and who the man with the burn was. The answer was not in Los Angeles, but where that bus had come from, back east, into the desert silence that hid something far more terrifying than simple loss. Among the items seized from Kevin Freeman during his hospitalization in Los Angeles, there was one item that was almost sent to be disposed of as ordinary garbage. It was an old, dirty jacket that he was wearing when he was detained under the overpass. It was several sizes too big, stained with the smell of the street and chemicals, and at first glance was of no value to the investigation. However, the procedure required a full inventory of the property, and it was this bureaucratic formality that changed the course of the entire case. When the officer on duty was emptying his pockets to draw up a report, a small object fell onto the table, a cheap plastic lighter of bright orange color. It was almost empty with a crack in the body, but on the side there was a half-worn logo, the silhouette of a cowboy boot with a spur, and the inscription, "Z Rusty Spur." To California police, the name meant nothing. A search of the local databases of licensed establishments in Los Angeles and the county yielded 0 results. There was no such bar or store in the city. The detectives on the case decided to expand their search. A search of the Federal Business Registry revealed only one active establishment with this specific name and logo. The Z Rusty Spur Bar was not in California, nor was it in any major transportation hub. It operated in the tiny town of Cottonwood, Arizona. When the investigators opened the map, the room fell dead silent. Cottonwood is located just 20 miles from Oak Creek Canyon, the very spot where Kevin Freeman got out of his father's car and disappeared 5 years ago. This small piece of cheap plastic, which cost less than $1, completely destroyed the main working theory of the investigation. Until that moment, it was believed that the boy could have gotten lost, wandered onto the highway, lost his memory due to dehydration or injury, and hitchhiked to California, where his fall began. But the presence of a lighter from a local bar in Cottonwood told a different story. Cottonwood is a town with shops, police, and people. If Kevin was there and bought this thing, he was not lost in the woods. He was among people. But why didn't he call his parents? Why didn't he go to the police? Why did he keep this object for years, even when his mind began to disintegrate under the influence of chemicals? The answer came to him, and it was horrifying. The lighter might not have belonged to him. It could have belonged to someone who gave it to him. Or he could have taken it from the place where he was being held. This discovery forced detectives to return to analyzing the clothes in which Kevin, according to witnesses, arrived in Los Angeles in 2017. The homeless's testimony about high-quality but dirty tourist clothes was reviewed by experts. A detailed description provided by one of the witnesses at the bus station indicated that the pants had characteristic reinforced knee pads, and the jacket was made of a rough tarpaulin. This was not the kind of hiking gear that school children buy for a day hike. This was specialized workwear. Experts from Arizona confirmed that this type of equipment is widely used by workers on remote farms, construction workers working in difficult conditions, or people engaged in hard physical labor in the open air. The fact that the clothes were a few sizes too big for Kevin only confirmed the guess. He had been issued these things. He was dressed in whatever was at hand so that he could work or simply exist in conditions far removed from civilized life. The geographical reference is closed. Cottonwood is located in close proximity to the woodlands bordering Oak Creek Canyon. This meant that Kevin Freeman did not travel the country all these years. He hadn't been wandering the desert, All that time, from the time he disappeared in 2014 to the time he boarded the bus in 2017, he stayed within a 20 to 30 mile radius of the place where his parents last saw him. The investigation instantly changed its vector. Now they weren't looking for a random kidnapper who took the boy across state lines on the very first day. They were looking for a location, an isolated place in Arizona where people wear work clothes, visit a bar in Cottonwood, and have the ability to hold a person for years without attracting attention. The lighter was proof that Kevin was there. He was alive, he was near his home, but he was in an area invisible to drones and search teams. The Arizona detectives pulled up emergency call records from 2014 to 2017, focusing on the Cottonwood area and surrounding areas. They were looking for any reports of strange people in the woods, illegal camps, or closed private areas. What had previously seemed like noise on the airwaves now took on an ominous meaning. The green walls that Kevin had dreamed about in the hospital were no longer just an abstraction of a sick mind. In the context of Arizona, where most of the landscape is red stone and dry grass, green walls could mean something very concrete, artificial, and carefully hidden from prying eyes. The plastic lighter pointed to the door behind which the truth about Kevin Freeman's lost years was hidden. All that remained was to find this door on the map. Information about the lighter from the Z Rusty Spur Bar and analysis of satellite imagery allowed investigators to narrow the search to a hard-to-reach sector of the forest northwest of Cottonwood. This area, known locally as Blind Canyon, has remained a white spot on tourist maps for decades due to the lack of trails and difficult gully-cut terrain. In November of 2019, a joint team of Forest Service rangers, detectives, and Special Forces soldiers began a large-scale operation to comb the area. They had to move on foot, as the use of vehicles could alert potential suspects. The first discovery that confirmed the correct direction came 4 miles from the nearest dirt road. One of the rangers spotted a black plastic pipe partially covered with red soil and pine needles. It was an industrial-scale irrigation line that stretched up the slope, drawing water from a mountain stream. In a national forest, such utilities could mean only one thing. A large, illegal agricultural operation was located somewhere ahead. Moving along the pipe, the group came to a plateau hidden in a natural bowl between rocks. What they saw explained Kevin's delusions about green walls. A huge area of forest had been turned into a disguised plantation. Hundreds of square feet of green camouflage netting and tarpaulin were stretched between the tree trunks, creating a continuous dome invisible from the air. The light filtered through this fabric with a dull, swampy hue, coloring everything around it a sickly green. This is what the boy had seen for years, an artificial sky made of plastic. The camp looked abandoned, but not long ago. Empty canisters of aggressive chemical fertilizers, pieces of hoses, piles of household garbage, and old clothes were lying on the ground. The scale of the facility was impressive. Illegal plants had been grown here for years, using the labor of people living in inhumane conditions. Among the garbage, the investigators found the remains of sleeping places, dirty mattresses thrown on the ground under awnings. But the main horror was not here. On the periphery of the camp, deep in a rocky niche, the Special Forces found a structure that was radically different from the temporary tents. It was a semi-dugout dug in the hard ground and reinforced with rough wooden beams. The entrance to it was not blocked by a door, but by a massive steel grate welded from rebar and angles, which was locked with a heavy padlock from the outside. It was not a home for workers. It was a cage. When the lock was cut and the group stepped inside, the beam of the flashlight picked out a space no larger than 6 by 6 feet. There was an earthen floor, no windows, and a heavy smell of dampness and excrement. In the corner was a pile of rags that served as a bed. Nearby were plastic bowls similar to those used to feed animals. The walls of the dugout were covered with plywood, which had darkened with time and moisture. The forensic scientist who examined the room noticed random scratches on one of the walls. Upon closer inspection, it became clear that these were not accidental scratches. It was a primitive, desperate calendar. Hundreds of vertical lines, grouped in 5 or 7 pieces, covered the wood from the floor to eye level. Someone was methodically counting down the days of their existence in this pit. The number of marks ran into the thousands, indicating years of isolation. At the bottom of the wall, near the bed, they found something that finally connected this place to the Freeman case. 2 Latin letters were scratched deep into the wood, probably with a piece of stone or metal. K.F. Next to them was another word, written smaller and unevenly, as if the author's hand was trembling with weakness. Help. Experts recorded every inch of this room. The hairs and epithelial microparticles found on the floor were immediately sent for DNA analysis. But for the detectives standing in that pit, there was no longer any doubt they had found the place where Kevin had spent his lost years. It was not just a base for growing illegal substances. It was a labor camp where people were turned into tools, and those who tried to resist or escape were locked in a cage under a green plastic sky. The discovery brought the case to the level of especially serious crimes. Now it was not only about abduction, but also about slavery and systematic torture. Although the camp was empty, the garbage and remnants of documents thrown in a hurry promised to give investigators the names of those who built this prison in the middle of the forest. After the discovery of the camp and the cell in Blind Canyon, the investigation received the necessary context to reconstruct the events of April 14, 2014. According to the detectives, Kevin Freeman did not get lost or go crazy. His only mistake was excessive curiosity and a fatal coincidence. Moving along the bed of a dried-up stream in search of good angles for geological surveys, he noticed unnatural greenery among the red rocks, a camouflage net that the wind had slightly raised above the level of the shrubbery. According to the main version of the investigation, the guy came too close to the perimeter of the illegal plantation. He did not have time to realize what he had found when he was spotted by the facility's security guards. These were people who had been growing and selling illegal substances on an industrial scale for years and were defending their business with weapons in hand. Kevin was captured instantly. His phone, which had managed to send the last message about the perfect place, was taken away and destroyed on the spot, smashed and thrown into a deep crevasse where its fragments were never found. Usually in such situations, witnesses are eliminated. However, the perpetrators made another pragmatic and cruel decision. They needed labor. A plantation in such a remote area required hard physical labor, carrying water, digging new ditches for irrigation, and tilling the soil. It was risky to use hired laborers for this purpose, and a 16-year-old physically strong boy, whom no one would look for in this area, was an ideal candidate for the role of a slave. Along with analyzing the location, forensic experts worked with traces found in the abandoned camp. On one of the plastic canisters lying near the entrance to the dugout, they found a partial palm print preserved by grease. A run through the Arizona State Criminal Database yielded a match. The print belonged to 45-year-old Richard Gaines, known in criminal circles as Skip. Gaines's dossier contained numerous records of theft, illegal possession of weapons, and small-scale sale of illegal substances. But the main detail that made detectives shudder was his photograph. The mugshot, taken 3 years before the events, clearly showed the effects of an old work injury, a massive, ugly chemical burn scar stretching from his left ear across his cheek to his neck. The skin in this area was tight, purple in color, and had a characteristic bumpy structure. This was the same Burn Man whose image haunted Kevin in his nightmares in the Los Angeles hospital room. The detectives found out that Gaines was not just a performer, but one of the camp's supervisors. He was responsible for the discipline and physical control of those held in the dugout. His brutality and appearance became for Kevin the personification of fear, which broke his will even before the chemicals took effect. However, when the police tried to find Gaines in hot pursuit, a fact came to light that caused outrage in the district attorney's office. Richard Gaines had already come to the attention of law enforcement in 2017, just as the camp was being dismantled. He was detained while checking a truck on the highway, in the back of which they found irrigation equipment and fertilizer residue. Back then, 2 years ago, the investigation was unable to link him directly to the production or sale of large-scale illegal substances. The camp in Blind Canyon had not yet been discovered at that time, and Kevin had already been taken to California. There was no direct evidence of Gaines's involvement in kidnapping or organizing a drug lab. Gaines' lawyers built a defense on the fact that he was only transporting garbage and old equipment for hire, not knowing about its origin. The judge, relying on the lack of direct evidence and procedural agreements, passed a lenient sentence. Richard Gaines received a suspended sentence for violating cargo transportation rules and minor administrative offenses. He was released right out of the courtroom. The man who had kept the teenager in a cage for years and ruined his life was released, remaining invisible to the justice system. This legal failure allowed Gaines to disappear off the police radar and live quietly for 2 more years, until his print on a dirty gas can finally revealed the true extent of his crimes. Now that the police had evidence of kidnapping and torture, his status was changed to most wanted, but time was lost. The 3 years that Kevin Freeman spent in Blind Canyon were not just a physical imprisonment. If he had been kept behind bars and forced to work at gunpoint, there would have been a risk of rebellion or escape attempts when the supervision was weakened. The camp organizers understood this perfectly well. Therefore, they used a much more reliable, invisible chain that shackled not his hands or feet, but his brain. Kevin's real prison was an artificially created chemical reality from which it is impossible to escape because you no longer understand where the exit is. Medical experts who subsequently analyzed the irreversible changes in Kevin's cerebral cortex concluded that his addiction was not a side effect, but a well-planned strategy. He was not just poisoned, he was systematically injected with heavy synthetic mixtures that suppressed his will, blocked his short-term memory, and caused deep apathy. This chemistry acted as a personality switch. Under its influence, a person turned into a biological mechanism capable of executing simple commands, digging, carrying, loading, but unable to analyze the situation or plan for the future. Control was exercised by manipulating access to these substances. The scheme was terrifyingly simple and effective. If Kevin worked, he received food and medicine that allowed him to sleep without pain or fear. If he tried to resist or simply fell down from fatigue, he was deprived of his dose. Then came the withdrawal state, a hell of physical pain, seizures, and hallucinations that broke any vestige of human dignity. After a few months of this regime, the concept of escape disappeared from his mind. The only purpose of his existence was to get the next dose of the substance that gave him oblivion. Richard Gaines, known as Skip, was the one who distributed these doses, becoming the boy's only source of relief from pain. This created a terrible psychological bond known as a traumatic bond. The victim becomes dependent on the torturer not only physically, but also emotionally. The situation changed in the fall of 2017. According to intelligence information that became known to the investigation later, the camp was threatened with exposure. Perhaps the Forest Service's aerial reconnaissance began to fly too close, or supply routes changed. The leadership of the criminal group decided to urgently curtail activities in this area. Equipment was dismantled, traces were covered, and structures were burned or buried. Only one issue remained to be resolved: what to do with the labor force. Kevin Freeman was a dangerous witness. He saw faces, heard names, knew locations. The logic of the criminal world dictated the only way out: liquidation. According to informants, it was Richard Gaines who received the order to remove the problem. He was instructed to take the boy deep into the forest and make sure that his body was never found. But at the last moment, the plan changed. Forensic psychologists suggest that Gaines, who had been controlling Kevin's life for years, did not dare to kill him directly. It was not an act of mercy or remorse. Rather, it was a fear of taking on the burden of a wet job or a pragmatic unwillingness to get blood on his hands when there was an easier way. Gaines chose an option that gave him a chance to get rid of the witness without firing a shot. He put Kevin, who was in a state of deep chemical intoxication and barely able to stand, in his truck. They drove for several hours north, leaving behind the green walls of the camp. Kevin had no idea where he was being taken. To his shattered mind, it was just a change of scenery in an endless nightmare. The end point of the route was the city of Flagstaff. Gaines drove the boy to the bus station, avoiding the CCTV cameras. He knew that Kevin would not be able to tell anyone. In the state he was in, dirty, wearing someone else's clothes, with his eyes wandering in the void, he looked like just another urban lunatic that no one would pay attention to. Gaines bought the ticket for cash. The destination was not chosen by chance, as far away from Arizona as possible, to a big city where thousands of nameless people disappear and appear every day. Los Angeles. A one-way ticket. He slipped the piece of paper into Kevin's hand, led him to the platform, and after making sure he got on, simply walked away. For Gaines, this was the solution to the problem. The guy would disappear into the metropolis, disappear among the homeless, or die of an overdose. In a few days, he didn't kill him with his own hands. He simply sent him on a slow journey into oblivion, believing that the forest and the chemistry had already done all the dirty work for him, forever erasing the memory of who Kevin Freeman was. When the Arizona coach crossed the border into Los Angeles and pulled into the terminal, it was not a moment of liberation for Kevin Freeman. It was just a change of scenery in the same abyss he had fallen into 3 years earlier. Who traveled with him could not remember his face later. He was quiet, motionless, merged into the seat. When the doors opened, he stepped out into the bustle of the metropolis, clutching the empty ticket that had become his only document. He had no money, no phone, and most importantly, no memory of who he was or where he was going. The streets welcomed him indifferently. The chemical mixtures that had been pumped into his body during the years in the forest camp continued to work even without new doses, destroying the remnants of his consciousness through withdrawal and irreversible neurological changes. Kevin instinctively drifted toward the neighborhood that attracts all the broken and forgotten. Skid Row. This place became his new home, his new green prison, only instead of camouflage netting overhead, there were now concrete overpasses and gray smog. Here, he finally lost his name, becoming Ari, a ghost who wandered between tents, searching for food in garbage cans and hiding from patrols. Medical experts who later studied Kevin's medical history noted in reports that his brain was in a state of constant fog. He was unable to formulate a request for help because he had forgotten what help was. People around him were just shadows, and reality was limited to the perimeter of his cardboard shelter. For 2 years, he existed in survival mode until he was found during the same raid. Meanwhile, in Arizona, justice was gaining momentum. Evidence found in a dugout in Blind Canyon became the foundation for one of the most high-profile trials in the county's history. Scratched into the wood paneling were the initials KDEF and the word HELP, which left the defense no chance. DNA testing confirmed that the biological traces in the cage belonged to Kevin Freeman. This allowed the prosecutor's office to reclassify the case. Richard Gaines, known as Skip, was arrested again, this time without bail. The investigation reached the tip of the iceberg. Thanks to the testimony of informants and analysis of financial flows, 2 more organizers of the illegal business were detained, landowners who had been covering the plantation and providing logistics for years. At the trial, they tried to shift the blame to Gaines, calling him an uncontrolled performer, but the systematic nature of the crime was obvious. It was not a lone initiative, but a well-coordinated mechanism for exploiting people. The trial lasted several months. Kevin's parents, Linda and Mark, were present at every hearing. Witnesses recalled that they sat in the front row holding hands and looked at the defendants with a look that contained no hatred, only boundless black fatigue. When the prosecutor read out the details of Kevin's detention, about the cage, about chemical exposure, about starvation and forced labor, the room was dead silent. Even the defense lawyers looked down. The verdict was harsh and final. Richard Gaines and 2 organizers of the criminal group were found guilty of kidnapping, human trafficking, inflicting grievous bodily harm, and organizing the illegal production of prohibited substances. All 3 were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Announcing the verdict, the judge called their actions the deliberate destruction of the human soul. Gaines listened to the verdict with a stony face, showing no signs of remorse. He was sent to a maximum security prison where he will spend the rest of his days behind the real bars he once built for others. But for the Freeman family, this sentence was not the end of the tragedy. Kevin did not return home in the sense they had dreamed of all these years. Physically, he was saved, but his personality remained forever shattered. Now he is in a closed, specialized medical facility in Arizona, where he receives round-the-clock care. Doctors say that his physical condition has stabilized. He has gained weight, the wounds on his arms have healed, turning into pale scars. However, his cognitive functions have not been restored. Kevin hardly ever speaks. He spends most of his time at the window, looking at the mountains he used to love to photograph. He recognizes his parents when they come in, but this recognition is more like a child's reaction to familiar faces than a son meeting his family. He doesn't remember school. He doesn't remember friends. He doesn't remember Emily. His world has shrunk to the size of the ward and the daily routine. Mark and Linda visit him every week. They read him books, tell him about the news, show him old photos, hoping that one day, even for a moment, a spark of understanding will flicker in his eyes. But more often than not, all they get in return is a quiet, confused smile. Kevin Freeman's story is a frightening reminder that danger in the wild does not always come from animals or the elements. Sometimes the worst predator is another human being. The Arizona forest did not kill his body. It did something much worse. It took his life, leaving his parents with only a shell, a shadow of the boy who got out of his car one sunny morning to take some photos and disappeared forever into the red dust of the canyon. His ticket was indeed a one-way ticket, but not to Los Angeles, but to the darkness from which even the survivors do not return.